Before we begin the video, I do want to give a quick shout out to my mod Corey, who originally gave me the idea for this build, as well as the person Exilia over on the PoE build subreddit. They played a pretty similar build this league, and their Reddit post had a couple good ideas that I did use for it, so shout outs to both of them. And also I do want to mention that if you are going to play this build, make sure that you watch the disclaimer section that comes immediately after the montage. Enjoy. Alright boys, so a disclaimer before you begin trying to play this build. There is going to be a path of building linked down in the description, however, I do need you to understand that there are a few things that you need to take into account. 1. If you do not have a very solid computer, you most likely cannot play this build. It can get very laggy, even with a very good computer when you're trying to use like Vol Ice Novas in like big giant juicy maps and stuff like that, so do be warned. 2. This build is a visual mess. There is no visual clarity to speak of pretty much no matter what version of this build that you play. It is very difficult to see what you're doing pretty much at all times. 3. The playstyle is very weird. You really do have to enjoy an interactive and pretty active playstyle to actually get full enjoyment out of this build. If you play it wrong, it actually does not function at all. So if you are interested in playing the build, make sure that you watch through all the section about how I explain how it works and everything else. And 4, this build does require very specific items to function. The very high-end version of the build also does require a specific Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame. There is a way around that I'll talk about later, but if you want to play the very good version of it, you do need that Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame, as well as a relatively expensive helmet. Now remember boys, if you're enjoying all of my content or this video helps you out, make sure to give it a like and also consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, hitting that notification bell to make sure that you stay up to date with all the latest videos. And without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have seen me playing this build over on twitch.tv/BigDucks, which you should go follow, by the way. I've been playing it for the last couple of weeks, and while I do think it turned out quite well, it's definitely different from most of the builds that I've played in recent time. Now, there is going to be a lot to go over here, like a ridiculous amount to go through. It's probably going to be a super long video, so if you want to jump to any particular section, or if you need like a recap on something that's maybe not working for you, I have chapters and timestamps down below the video, so you can go jump to any particular section that you need. Now first off, what actually is this build? This is a Spell Slinger Frostbolt Ice Nova Inquisitor that uses the Fanaticism keystone. This is Instruments of Zeal. And what this node does is it means that if you have attacked in the last second, you are gaining Fanatic charges. When you gain 4 Fanatic charges, you gain this buff called Fanaticism. It gives you 75% more cast speed, 75% reduced costs, and 75% increased area of effect. So the idea is that when we are casting our Ice Nova normally, it looks like about this, and that's about as fast as we can cast it, due to mana cost among other things. But when we do stack up these Fanatic charges that you can see here and we gain the Fanaticism buff, all of a sudden we can cast significantly faster and the Ice Novas end up being much larger. And so the idea here is that if we do have the Fanaticism buff, we can have a essentially free spell that casts significantly faster and is significantly larger. Now we also do use intensity on this, so it will get smaller as you cast more of it, but if you're moving around consistently, the AoE stays quite large. That is the base concept of this build. We are slinging a Frostbolt to facilitate having the Fanaticism charges up, and we are self-casting the Ice Nova because it gives us so much additional speed, AoE, as well as reduced cost. Now talking a little bit about how this build actually scales damage, we are in Inquisitor. Inquisitors scale their damage in very specific ways. Mainly this is going to be through crit, as well as cast speed, and the fact that they can completely ignore elemental resistances, which we do. So the Inquisitor has this node called Righteous Providence. It means that as long as we are stacking both strength and intelligence, we get a ton of critical strike chance. This gives us most of the critical strike chance of the build. And then also we have Inevitable Judgment, and it means that if we are critting all of the time, we completely ignore enemy monster elemental resistances. This is completely ignore, meaning anything that affects enemy monster resistances in a positive or negative is completely taken out of the equation. For example, the Blizzard Crown that we use means that your Hitch Treat cold resistance is 10% higher. That is completely ignored. If the enemy, say, had like a debuff on them that reduced their resistances, like Exposure or a Curse, that is completely ignored. So while we can't scale our build's damage through negative resistances, we simply don't need to because we're ignoring them. This build also does scale Consecrated Ground effect. This is the main way that we are going to be using Righteous Fire. And Righteous Fire does give us a pretty substantial buff. We are able to get Righteous Fire working specifically because of Pious Path. Inquisitor has a very easy time scaling Righteous Fire defenses because it can gain the hybrid recovery through life regeneration as well as energy shield regeneration, and it is relatively close to some max resistances, so Righteous Fire is pretty easy to scale. Beyond that, we are doing all of the normal self-casting things: crit, cast speed, spell damage, elemental damage, and so forth. We are also going to be low life here. We have pain attunement. We do this through petrified blood. We'll talk more about that in the defensive section. Now, we do scale this through intensity, as I said previously. The idea here is that the intensity gem is going to give us more area damage, meaning we're going to be getting up to a 60% more area damage multiplier off of this gem when it is at max stacks. And the idea behind casting so quickly is we can get to 4 stacks of intensity almost instantly. It's within, the cast time is 0.15 seconds, so that means within 1 second we are already at max stacks of intensity. So for a boss fight, we're able to get that 60% more damage pretty much instantly. Beyond that, we are using Spell Echo. The way that Ice Nova Frostbolt works is that if you self-cast Ice Nova, you do have to do the full Spell Echo cast. However, if you cast it off of a Frostbolt, you are not locked in place while that Frostbolt does its Echo. This is the main idea behind the build that uses the staff that gives you greater Spell Echo, the Hierophant version that people have played for a long time. Spell Echo and greater Spell Echo stack, and you're not locked in place for that cast, meaning that you can continue casting even though the Spell Echoes still need to go off. Beyond that, we do scale our damage through the Hatred and Zealotry auras. Hatred is going to be used on a Blessing, and once again, because the reduced cost that we get from Fanaticism will massively reduce the cost down to 76, from when we don't have that all the way up to 700, which we do not have that amount of mana. And as a final little piece, we are using a Vortex that is linked with Bone Chill, so since we are already casting the Frostbolts out into the sky, we can place down these Vortexes under the enemy, which is going to make them take increased cold damage. We can get pretty easily up to 20 to 30% effective chill off of this, so it is a pretty solid damage multiplier. So that is most of the ways that we scale damage. Let's talk about defenses. This build is going to be a block, maximum resist, as well as recovery based build. Typically these days in Path of Exile, you need 2 out of 3 of the major defensive layers, I guess you could call them. One is going to be actually just physically reducing the damage that you take, one is going to be avoiding damage taken completely, and another is going to be recovering that damage. If you have at least 2, you typically are okay. This build is mainly focusing on reducing the damage that we take as well as recovering that damage that we do take. We don't have pretty much any damage avoidance because we are completely getting rid of evasion and we are using glancing blows for block. So this build is able to get maximum block, but it does take a decent amount more investment. We are at 68, 68. If I wanted to get more than that, I would need to level up more, or I would need to invest in a couple different particular things on the tree, which aren't as useful as having some other stats. Once again, we are going to be glancing blows. That means that we are going to be taking a decent amount of damage for these blocks. However, the idea is that we want to just get as much block chance as we possibly can so that we can recover our life whenever we block. Beyond that, as I said previously, we are going maximum resistances, mainly through the Prismatic Skin, maximum fire res, and Soul of Steel nodes. We do also have +2 to maximum fire res on our shield. This is to facilitate taking less damage from Righteous Fire. And then on top of that, we are also Petrified Blood. Now the idea behind Petrified Blood, this mechanic is a little bit complicated, but it makes it so that while you are under or at 50% of life, 40% of life loss below half-life is prevented, but this is only from hits. The main downside to being a Petrified Blood low-life build is that damage over time can be substantially difficult to deal with. Now the idea here is that because we have so much recovery, damage over time isn't actually that big of a deal. If you ran a life flask that had immunity to ignite on it instead of corrupting blood, it would make it so that you could instantly start healing yourself substantially faster to damage over time, and you wouldn't have to worry about that. But once again, the idea here is that since we have such high quality on this gem, which I'll tell you about here in a moment, we are only taking 68% of that damage over time instead of the full 100% that we would lose anyways. So since we have so much recovery on this build, we are able to offset the downside of Petrified Blood. Now we do have a lot of this percentage because we are using Ashes of the Stars. We'll talk about this more in the gearing section. Now we are using quite a few auras. We're using Purity of Elements. This is to give us immunity to elemental ailments. When we're a Petrified Blood low life build, Vitality has double effectiveness essentially. We are also using Determination, and we are using Tempest Shield to give us some more spell block. Now I would like to be able to fit Defiance Banner in. It would be very nice. However, it would take a lot more min-maxing. Like we would have to get some more reservation efficiency on a few more pieces of of gear, and that would be quite a bit more money. So I wasn't able to fit it in with the budget that I'm trying to stick to for this build. And on top of that, we are very stretched thin when it comes to links. If I didn't want to be using the Animate Guardian, which we will also talk about in a moment, we could fit the Defiance banner in here and then try to get just a little bit more reservation efficiency. So as a recap, the build is blocking, is recovering life very quickly through leech, as well as life gain on block. You can also get some, I don't have any at the moment, but life gain on spell hit. We do hit quite frequently, so it is okay. Not the best for this build, leech is substantially better. But then we also have maximum resistances and a huge amount of quality to make sure that our petrified blood isn't doing that much damage to us. Now, before we talk about the gear, I do want to talk about our friend here, the Animate Guardian. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Big Ducks, why are you using an Animate Guardian on a random Inquisitor self-cast build? You can't even keep these alive on Necromancers most of the time. Well, thanks to probably one of the more popular new items in the game this league, Ashes of the Stars gives up to 30% quality, +1 to level of all skill gems, and that makes it so that we can keep an Animated Guardian alive relatively easily. So the main way that we do this is through the Divergent Animate Guardian gem. This makes it so that quality is giving us increased minion maximum life. If we look at this Animate Guardian, it's got about 46,000 life. And on top of that, it is gaining recovery from our Consecrated Ground. It is getting the hybrid regen that we give normally. And because our Ascendancy lets it last for 4 seconds, it also is maintaining that every time we move. Now on top of that, we are using Mask of the Stitch Demon, as you can see on him. What Mask of the Stitch Demon does is it takes all of your energy shield away essentially and gives you percentage recovery depending on how much you have. So we are using a Garb of Ephemeral that has an implicit 3% of life gained as ES, and then we have spent a couple points to cap his resistances, as well as gain 20% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. This gives him a ton of recovery on top of the recovery we provide him with Consecrated Ground. So between that, the resistances, the good life totals, he is mostly fine. Now you might be wondering, well, Big Ducks, what are you actually getting from the Animate Guardian? Well, he's using a Kingmaker, which means we are getting Culling Strike, we are getting 50% to Critical Strike multi, as well as 10 stacks of Fortification, and on top of that, Garb of the Ephemeral is solving the one major problem that I have with PoE at the moment, and that is there are too many slows in this game that you can't deal with. Garb of the Ephemeral makes it so that nearby enemies cannot crit, as well as nearby allies cannot be slowed below base movement speed. So that means anything that slows you below base movement speed, meaning things like stuns, meaning things like freezes, chills, hands from the ground, maims, normal slows, grasping vines, etc., etc., etc. None of those can slow you down all the way. Now, do I think that he is worth the amount of money that I've spent on him, and do I think that he is worth making a hungry loop with level 3 Empower, Meat Shield, Elemental Army, and Minion Life, and giving up an entire slot on my gear? Honestly, I'm not sure. I enjoy using him because the Culling Strike is very nice. It means that I am able to use an Anoint that isn't the Culling Strike on marked targets node, and I have the ability to not be slowed ever, so I feel like it's pretty good for me, but it did cost us probably a total of 7 to 8 Exalt to get him working. Alternatively, you can just use another ring with life, cast speed, and a socket in it, and you can get another gem. But I tend to like the Animate Guardian. Now, he can stay alive in most things. The only thing that has gotten close to killing him so far are very, very, very juiced, like 80% plus Delirium maps, and the super high levels of Simulacrum. Once he starts getting into like wave 25 or higher in Simulacrum, he can't really survive anymore, and that's mostly my character's fault actually, because this character is not min-max enough to be doing wave 30 Simulacrum. I would need substantially better gear, and I really don't want to spend like another 100 Exalt on this character to get the gear that I would need to do very high tier Simulacrums. So because the enemies don't die fast enough, he tends to take a lot of the brunt of it. Now, speaking about gear, let's go over the gear. So starting with our wand, we are simply looking for plus the level of cold spell skill gems. We're looking for cold damage to spells, crit chance, cast speed, as well as crit strike multi. Now, this wand could be upgraded pretty easily with a +1/+1 wand. However, I spent probably more time and money and effort than I am happy to admit trying to roll this one into a +1 wand with other things on it. It's supposed to be like 1 in 4 of the 4 fossil set, and I did it 15 times and never got it a single time, so I kind of got upset with it and just quit rolling it. Ideally, you would want to get like the +1/+1 wand, keep the prefixes, and then like reroll suffixes or reroll crit on suffixes with prefixes can't be changed. For the shield, which is pretty important for this build, I could also upgrade this shield by continuing to do suffixes cannot be changed and reforging cold, but I did that as well like 15 times and never got the +1 to cold gems, so I kind of gave up on it. But the main stats that you're looking for in a shield are life gain when you block, as well as maximum fire resistance. You can also get maximum all resistances, that would be substantially more expensive, and you can do this on an armor-based shield if you want more life and you want more armor for it. However, it can't roll things like increased crit strike for spells or things like +1 to cold if it isn't an energy shield base. The gloves honestly could be better, but you need the base that has cold damage leached as life. It is our main source of cold damage leech, as well as unnerve, which those two aren't too hard to get. You could roll them on pretty much anything you like, but we mainly are looking for dexterity, life, and chaos, and any other resistances we can get. There's a lot of room for improvement on these gloves. I just honestly didn't really feel like doing it. For the belt, we're mainly looking for life, percentage life, any good flask mods that we can get. The regenerate life per second is actually pretty good, and then any resistances. In the Abyss Jewel, it is important that you get gain phasing on kill. This is pretty important for clearing. We don't really have room for any other source of phasing here, so this one works quite well. For our boots, we are using Onslaught Elusive and Tailwind boots. These are not necessary for the build to work, but for the cost of these, it isn't actually that expensive, just a few exalt. They really do a lot for the build. I haven't even finished these yet. They could have life on them. I could change the fire resist to cold or lightning if I really needed to, but that would need an Ashling Slam among other things, and I really didn't feel like finishing them up. Didn't want to spend any more money on this build. But keep in mind, don't need these, but they are very, very powerful for the relatively low cost of making them. For the rings, as I said previously, we're just looking for any stats that we need, mainly cast speed. Cast speed is very important because we get a lot of more cast speed, but we need increased cast speed as well. On top of that, life, chaos, and other resistances. You might need a minus mana cost on at least one of your rings if you do want to be able to cast without having to worry about mana. Our cast for our Ice Nova is around 3 mana, I think, when we have Fanaticism up, so the minus mana cost does help with that a lot. Now, I did talk about the Hungry Loop quite a bit already. You could just get another ring very similar to this instead, and that would work perfectly fine. The chest piece is just going to be a sacrificial garb with whatever you need for your build. For me, I wanted a ton of life, I wanted a little bit of base spell crit, and I wanted a bit of gain maximum life as maximum energy shield. I'll talk more in the Path of Building notes about how to craft this, but the idea is that you get the sacrificial garb, you're going to fill up the suffixes, and then you are going to hit it with a Hunter's Exalted Orb. I think you have a 1 out of 3 chance to hit percentage maximum life. If you don't get it, you can just continue, or you can try to reroll it with fossils. So the way that I made this particularly is that I alteration rolled the chest piece until I got a really good maximum life roll. I augmented on a suffix, I regaled on another suffix, crafted a third suffix, so all suffixes were filled, and then I hit it with the Hunter's Exalt. I hit the 12% maximum life roll, and then from there what I ended up doing is I did a multi-mod, prefixes cannot be changed, as well as gain 9% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield, and then I crit rerolled it with Harvest. And that is how you see the chest piece as is. The main reason we're using the sacrificial garb is because we are using a Vol Ice Nova. This gives us +1 to level, and it takes some pressure off of trying to get an anomalous level 21 Vol Ice Nova. That's pretty expensive. The Ashes of the Stars. Honestly, this amulet is a little broken. It's a little too powerful, and I do think that most likely next league it is either going to get a nerf to its strength or it's going to get a nerf to its drop rate. The fact that it gives so much on just one amulet is pretty insane. The main reason for this is that if you are scaling alt quality gems, this becomes insanely powerful, and I'll give you just a couple examples. Divergent Righteous Fire, we're getting 50% increased spell damage because of the amulet. Divergent Animate Guardian, we're getting maximum life and it's keeping it alive. Anomalous Ice Nova makes it so that it is increased damage with hits against chilled enemies, 73% increased damage here. And the list just kind of goes on and on. Even things that aren't alt quality, like for example, Frenzy gains attack speed because of quality. So we gain a ton of attack speed on Frenzy and don't need to link it to anything else. We're using things like Anomalous Purity of Elements. It's giving us more resistances, increased effect of the aura, Petrified Blood. It means that we are taking less damage from that life loss prevented. Ashes of the Stars, just a very, very, very powerful amulet. amulet. Stats, it's got reservation efficiency of skills, it's got +1 to levels, quality all gems, makes it so we can run more auras, makes it so that our gems level up faster. It's just all in all one of the better amulets in the game right now. Speaking of our flasks, we are using only gain charges when you're hit by an enemy and used when charges are full. I rolled all 4 of these flasks myself. It only took me 300 to 400 alterations, and I got these flasks, which are insanely powerful. I do suggest that if you are playing a build that does get hit relatively often, to try rolling some flasks like this. Now, the way that I went about this is that I took the 4 base flasks that I knew that I would need, and I continued rolling them until I got the gain charges when you're hit by an enemy, augmented another roll onto it, and then if the roll was bad, I would try annulling it. If I annulled off the bad roll, I would try augmenting it again. And as I got better versions of these, I would swap around my flasks, right? So say that I had rolled a Quicksilver with like, I don't know, a small roll to gain armor. I would try the next one, and if I got a better prefix and got a better roll on armor, I would swap out and start rolling the Quicksilver again. And I just kept doing that until I got all of the ones that I wanted. The mods that I'm using are increased crit chance, cast speed, spell damage leached as energy shield, as well as reduced effective curses. Between the reduced effective curses here, as well as the reduced effective curses on Yugal, we are almost curse immune. I think we only have 8% effective curses, basically. For the life flask, you could roll this to remove ignite, but I don't have a source of immunity to corrupted blood at the moment because I would need to level up one more time, so I swapped it over to corrupting blood. You could use ignite on here, and it would make it so that you could basically be mostly immortal whenever you click this. It would turn your righteous fire off, and you would continue recovering. Now, I have particularly left the helmet to last because I am going to explain why you need this helmet, how to craft it, as well as the estimated cost of crafting it. So this is a self-crafted Blizzard Crown. Now, as I said previously, because we're an Inquisitor, we do ignore resistances, so the Blizzard Crown is an obvious choice for this helmet. It gives us a bunch of added cold damage to everything, meaning attacks, spells, and so on and so forth. And it does do one major thing. It alleviates our mana cost a little bit because this isn't actually a 6-link. It is only ending up being a 5-link, while giving us substantially more damage and saving us gem slots. This build is insanely hungry for gem slots, and being able to save 2 gem slots is huge. Now, this is not the highest end version of this helmet that you can get. We're going to swap over into Craft of Exile, and I will show you how to craft this helmet. I'll show you how to get the version that I have here, which is substantially easier, as well as the substantially harder to get version, which is going to require much, much more money. A helmet like this, you could probably craft if you were lucky for about 8 Exalt, if you were unlucky about 15 Exalt. If you want to craft the higher tier version, you're looking at 20 to 50 depending on your luck. Okay, so now that we're over here in Craft of Exile, this is the craftofexile.com emulator. It means that I can show you how to craft things without having to do it in game and spend like 20 Exalt to do it. We're going to create a new item. We're looking to make a helmet. So it's going to be a Dex Int helmet because that is the base for Blizzard Crown. Now, to create this base is actually a little bit involved. I would say that you're most likely just going to want to go and buy a base, or you might just be able to find the helmet already made over on the trade website. If you can do that, just go buy it. If it's under 15 Exalt, it's probably worth it. But the way that you would do this is we can only have up to eye level 83 on Blizzard Crowns because this is from Ritual only. You can set the quality to 30 if you want to spend that time. It's not that important in my opinion, so I just left mine at 20. We need to get a Shaper base. The way that you're going to do this is you're going to obtain the Blizzard Crown. You're going to choose whatever the cheapest orb is when it comes to the influence ones, meaning Crusader, Hunter, Redeemer, and Warlord. Choose whatever the cheapest one is, and then use the Harvest Change influence and try to get the Shaper base. That is the only real way to get a Shaper Blizzard Crown. Now, the problem with showing you this process in Craft of Exile is that the Glyphic Fossil does not exist in here. What the Glyphic Fossil does is it gives you one of the Horror, Hysteria, Insanity, or Delirium mods. The idea is that we're wanting the Horror or the Hysteria mod, and the way that this works is that we use Frigid as well as Prismatic, and then we use the Glyphic Fossil. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us one of the Essence of Horror or one of the Essence of Hysteria mods. It could give Insanity as well as Delirium. We don't want those. As well as a very high chance to get Hypothermia. That is what we're going for. So unfortunately, even if I do this here, it probably will show up with Hypothermia quite quickly. But if we did have the Glyphic Fossil in there, it would also be putting on one of the Essence mods. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit it with an Essence of Horror, and we are going to simulate doing that by manually adding the mod on there. And that is going to be a Shaper suffix, which is Hypothermia. So we go to Hypothermia here, we'll add on a T1 of Hypothermia, and there we go. Now, the problem that you're going to run into is that once you get this base, it is about every 5 to 6 tries of that 3 fossil combo, meaning that it is going to be Frigid, Prismatic, and Glyphic. You will get either Hysteria, we are low life, so it should be fine, or Horror. Once you get that combination done, almost assuredly you are going to have a third suffix. The problem and difficulty with rolling this helmet is that you have to have that suffix open. So the only realistic way to do this is that you are going to need to hit it with an annul. This is the main cost of making this helmet, is that the fossil combo isn't that expensive, but being able to hit this helmet and remove that fire resistance without removing these other 2 mods is relatively unlikely, even though I just got it on my first try. But the idea would be is that sometimes you're not going to get it perfectly like that, and you will have to start doing it with fossils again from the start. But as you can see, I will just go ahead and manually do this one so we can have what we would normally be looking for. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be crafting suffixes cannot be changed. This is a prefix, so you need an open prefix. If you get to the point where you have 3 full prefixes and the 2 suffixes that you want, you can craft whatever you would like on the suffixes, meaning just like a random empty node, just so that you're filling that modifier, and then you can use the harvest craft, keep suffixes, reroll prefixes. So we're going to craft suffixes cannot be changed, and then we are going to hit it with a harvest crit reroll. Now, the idea here is that when you hit it with this harvest crit reroll, you're going to either get 1%, 2%, or 3% crit. Depending on how invested you are in the build, 1% may be too low. I would probably say if you get 2% or higher, just keep it. I did end up getting 1% on my own helmet, and we got 1% here, but the idea would be is that you'd have to restart from the beginning, go back to where you were to where suffixes cannot be changed, and hit it with the crit reroll. Now, unfortunately, I'm not getting lucky here either. That's 3 1% in a row. Okay, so we got the 2%. So now your suffixes are done. Now, from this point, there are 2 ways to craft this helmet. There is a very cheap way, and there is a very expensive way. And cheap is kind of just relative to the other way to craft this. Now, the cheap way to go about this is that you are simply going to craft suffixes cannot be changed. You're going to hit it with a Veiled Chaos Orb, and then before you unveil it, you are going to craft the Summon Raise Zombies and maximum number of Summon Skeletons on it. Craft this on here, and then you will hit Unveil. What you are looking for is you are looking for +2 to level of AoE gems. We did not get it here, so what you would end up doing is you would craft suffixes cannot be changed again, and then you would hit it with another orb. So we'll hit it with suffixes cannot be changed, hit it with another Veiled Chaos Orb. Once again, we're going to craft on maximum zombies, maximum skeletons, because this has a very high chance to show up in the Unveil. Hit it with the Unveil, hopefully get +2 to level of socketed AoE gems, which we did, and then the final thing that you're going to do is you're just going to craft life, and then you're pretty much done with the helmet. You could, like, slam this with an Exalt if you really wanted to. I don't necessarily know that that's worthwhile, but this is the basic version of the helmet. Now, all that the more expensive version of the helmet gets you is going to be 1 additional modifier on the prefix, and that is Shaper Cold Damage. So if we go back a little bit here to the point where we are finished with the suffixes, what you can do from here is you can craft suffixes cannot be changed. You can hit it with a cold reroll from Harvest, meaning we're going to do a cold reforge, and it will give you Shaper Cold Damage. Now, you can keep doing this until you get tier 1, and if you're going for the expensive one, I suggest that you probably do that anyways. But the idea here is we've got Shaper tier 1 cold damage. Now, if you do get another prefix, you can continue here, but if you get 2 full prefixes, you're probably going to have to hit it with a Harvest, keep suffixes, reroll prefixes, and try again. So if you get this, what you can do is you can craft suffixes cannot be changed 1 final time. You can hit it with an Ashling Slam, and then hope that it takes off the maximum energy shield here, because if it doesn't, you're not going to be able to have life on your item. So we'll hit it with the Ashling Slam, and we will hope that it takes off the extra mod there, and it did. Normally, if you didn't get an additional prefix there, you're hoping that it's going to hit the suffixes cannot be changed, and then you would craft on zombies once again, you would unveil it, and you would hope to get +2 level of AoE, and if you don't get +2 to level of AoE here, you're going to have to restart from putting on the cold damage. And that is the main reason why this is so expensive. Now, alternatively, you could just choose a life roll if you do get one of the life rolls, and then craft +1 to AoE if that's what you want to do, but you're going to lose a level of gem here, because if you do do craft +1 AoE on there, it's only going to be +1 instead of +2. So that's the idea behind crafting the very expensive version of it. Now, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the skills that we use. We are using Molten Shell since we are attempting to scale a little bit of armor. We do use Vol Molten Shell as well. This is going to just give us a bigger version of Molten Shell every once in a while when we need to survive. I've already spoken at length about Ice Nova as well as Frostbolt. We are using Frenzy as the ability that procs our Spellslinger. This makes it so that we do get Frenzy charges as we are attacking things. We do use Vortex. Once again, this is just as a debuff to enemies to chill them as well as to get the Bone Chill effect. We are moving around mainly with Shield Charge, and this serves two purposes. One, it does give us stacks of Fanatic charges, and two, it does move relatively quickly. Feels pretty good as a movement skill. We're using a shield, might as well. We do have Flame Dash. This is to cross gaps or to instantly move away from maybe boss abilities. If I was to remove one gem, it would probably be Flame Dash, just because it is much easier to move around with Shield Charge, especially when you get like lots of shrines and things like that. But if I really had to squeeze out one more gem from the build, it would be Flame Dash. Now, as said previously, I am using a Blessing Hatred. You do have to have Fanaticism up to be able to afford the Blessing, but it is a pretty solid Blessing. We're getting a ton of cold damage from it. The curse that we're using is going to be Assassin's Mark. This is to finish capping our crit on bosses as well as some crit strike multiplier. With the quality that we do get on Assassin's Mark, this is also our source of power charges on bosses. We get to power charges max immediately with this because it's a 12% chance due to the Ashes of the Stars. If you did have, say, power charges from like block or something like that, and you could manage to keep them up, you could do the alt quality, which would make the enemy take more damage. Beyond that, as I said, we're using Righteous Fire. We are scaling regeneration through our Consecrated Ground, as well as maximum fire resistance to deal with that. I've already spoken about the auras we use. We do use Vol Ice Nova. This is very powerful for clearing maps. And that is about it for the skills. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the gems and such that we're using. The first one mainly being the Forbidden Flesh. We're using a Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame combo to get the Instruments of Zeal. Now, the idea behind this is that Battle Mage is really not that useful for this build. No matter how much added damage you get on the wand, it just isn't as good as other stats. So, since we want to make sure that we have Pious Path to be able to scale Righteous Fire, and we want to be able to have Sanctuary, this is the best outcome that we can get. Alternatively, if you cannot afford the Instruments of Zeal one, or it doesn't exist, there is another one, but honestly, I think it's going to be more expensive, and that is the Pious Path. You could get a chest piece instead of this one that gave you Consecrated Ground around you while you're stationary, and then you could skip the Sanctuary, go for the Pious Path, and take Instruments of Virtue as well as Instruments of Zeal. All of that being said, in the very basic budget version of this build, which is not that good, by the way, you can simply ignore the entire Consecrated Ground line and go straight for Instruments of Zeal. It does work, but it prevents you from using Righteous Fire, which is a big source of damage for this build, and it does prevent you from having the recovery of this section here. The build functions substantially better when you have it set up like this. But do keep in mind the Instruments of Zeal, Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame, but if you can get your hands on this and you can get your hands on the helmet, the build essentially functions completely at that point. As for other jewels, our main rare jewels are just going to be 2 damage mods of whatever you can get, as well as life. You can also go for some resistances here if you need them. On top of that, we are using a couple cluster jewels. We're using a spell damage cluster jewel because it is going to provide us a bunch of good modifiers. These are substantially cheaper than getting like an elemental damage one or even a cold damage one, because the specific mods that we need are very rare and cold damage builds are pretty popular right now. So a spell damage cluster is significantly cheaper. And then to be able to manage the mana that we've got right now, I need a single small efficiency cluster that has one of our big auras, meaning you could do either Zealotry or you could do Determination. Purity of Elements doesn't have one of these, I'm pretty sure. I chose Zealotry because of the increased effect of Consecrated Ground, and then once again, just Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame. We are using a Watcher's Eye. This one came relatively cheap. It is mainly for the Arcane Surge when you create Consecrated Ground, and then a little bit of crit to help scale our crit chance. These Watcher's Eyes shouldn't be too expensive right now, but they might go up in cost if a couple people buy them out. But there are a variety of different Watcher's Eyes that would be good for this build. Now, as for the God powers, the Pantheon, we are mainly using Soul of Aracali because we get the reduced damage taken from damage over time. This is going to be helping us with Righteous Fire. The increased recovery rate of Life and Energy Shield if you've stopped taking damage over time recently would be good if I was using the Remove remove Ignite, meaning that we would recover our life significantly faster. Debuffs on our Expiring Us is nice. We don't have that many debuffs that are on us. And then Chaos Resistance to damage over time and reduced damage taken from damage over time is really powerful because damage over time are the main things that kill us. I'm using Soul of Yugal to get reduced effective curses on you, and then also just the reduced reflected damage. Whenever I do Etziri on this build, I do have to drop these crit nodes here as well as some life and go move into the Elemental Mastery here to get the other portion of damage reflection. You could just use, instead of this ring, you could use Sibyl's Lament if you wanted to as well. As for the skill tree, this is a pretty basic Inquisitor caster skill tree at the moment. The main things that we're trying to stretch for are going to be the aura nodes as well as a cluster jewel. We're trying to get over here for low life. You do need a single caster mastery. It's very important to get the +1 maximum intensity for boss damage. And then on top of that, we're going for Iron Will. We stack a decent amount of strength. Over towards Glancing Blows and some block nodes here because we are trying to scale as much block chance for the recover life when we block. And then we're moving down to the bottom portion of the tree to get access to these maximum resistance nodes as well as some aura nodes and the Unwavering Stance. You could drop this with the Animate Guardian because technically we can't be stunned when we're nearby him, but you're not always nearby the Animate Guardian, so I've kept this in. You could get a little bit more evasion and such if you really wanted to, but I think that it's fine as is. Once again, I could take Corrupting Blood here, immunity to this if I got one level above, so there is that as well. You could also get some Chaos Resist or reduced effective curses. Alright, so I do want to run a map for you guys. This is going to be a 80% Delirious Cemetery, rolled rare. It's got more magic monsters, additional rogue exiles, chance to cause elemental ailments on hit, but we're immune to elemental ailments, and onslaught. We're going to be running it with a Gilded Abyss, a Gilded Breach, a Gilded Ambush, and a Gilded Legion Scarab. Now, this is a very dangerous map, and it is going to be quite difficult. We're going to put Alva on there as well. Now, the one thing about this kind of map is that I can run it with Beyond here. However, do keep in mind that if you run these like super high-end maps with Beyond and such on them, Beyond is very dangerous for the Animate Guardian. I'm going to go ahead and run it on here, but he might die. I just want to kind of show off the build, and I'm mostly done with it anyways. So we've got a bunch of Sextants on here. I think notably I did roll a cold damage Sextant, so we're going to be doing a little bit more damage, but taking a little bit more damage. But that's the idea. Here's the map. We're using Abyss, Breach, Legion, and Ambush. We're going to be rolling Beyond on it. We're using the Eater of Worlds as well as an Alva Temple. Now, as you can kind of see, sometimes the Animate Guardian is going to be taking a little bit of damage here. It's typically not a huge amount of damage most of the time, but you can see his health bar does fluctuate a little bit. And this is we're getting towards the more juicy part of this. As he gets further away from us, he no longer gets that recovery, and especially the Beyond mobs tend to do a lot of damage to him, as you can see. But he's recovering pretty well. It's mainly Course Explosions whenever you get, I don't remember which one of the Beyond mobs does it, but here's a boss. So the idea is that the build is honestly not super well suited to doing boss damage. This is more of a clear type build. But as long as we keep Fanaticism up, the boss damage isn't too bad, considering this is, you know, 80% Delirious. And you can see that even though I stepped in those hands there, as long as the Animate Guardian is next to us, we don't actually feel the brunt of those hands too badly. And it's one of the main reasons that I use him, is because I was doing a lot of Delirium testing and a lot of Simulacrum testing, which at the end of the day, we kind of figured out that I would really need to spend more money on gear to get like to wave 30 Simulacrum even somewhat consistently. And we've got Kosis as well, so I guess you'll get to see Kosis too. So as I said, boss damage is okay on this build, but it isn't really a super high boss damage build. Now, one thing that I will say that's very positive about the Animate Guardian is that when it comes to Kosis and it comes to Onomatopoeia, he kind of just tanks them up. Like, he'll just stand there and tank the bosses no problem while they sit there and wail on them, and that's pretty nice, actually. Now, I would say probably one of the more dangerous things in Path of Exile right now, and that's fortunately not one, are those giant essence mobs, because I tend to use essences of corruption or whatever they're called, remnants of corruption on those big mobs sometimes. They can honestly be some of the most dangerous things in the game, in my opinion, at this point when it comes to like this high-end mapping. Those like 10 mob essence mods are more difficult than like feared sometimes. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. But you kind of get the idea. It does pretty big AoE damage. It's got relatively good clear. When the packs get really giant and juicy, you can get some pretty sizable Vol Ice Novas going on. For the most part, it's relatively tanky. There are a few things that do cause this build problems. Particularly, damage over time is really, really rough because we are a Petrified Blood build. Once again, if you didn't have Righteous Fire on, the Petrified Blood wouldn't be as big of a deal because our recovery is so good. But that's most of the idea. Now, we will go ahead and take this boss down. The main problem, there, it happened right there, actually. The main problem with this build really does come down to keeping your fanaticism up. If your fanaticism does drop, the build feels really bad all of a sudden. And if you're not very good at keeping that fanaticism up, I probably wouldn't say that this is a build that you want to play. You really do have to get good at the alternating back and forth between slinging the frost bolts and using the ice nova and over and over and over again. Now, legions are also super dangerous, but typically if you don't have your intensity stacked up, you can get some really juicy ice novas on these legions, but now, unfortunately, it's just going to be a really sad legion. There, I sort of got it there. Yeah, typically the way that I do it is that I do 2 big, juicy Vol Ice Novas as soon as the legion spawns, and it clears most of it, but yeah, I screwed it up there, and I left the intensity super high. When the intensity is very high, unfortunately, the AoE on your Ice Nova is pretty tiny. But you get the idea. Now, I'm probably not going to sit here and clear this entire map for you, but you mostly should get the idea of how it performs. We fought Kosas, we fought Onomatopoeia, we fought some big, giant, juicy Beyond and all of that kind of stuff. I keep getting Corrupting Blood, and that's probably the scariest part. And you got an idea of how tanky the Animate Guardian is, even in a big, giant, Beyond corpse explosion environment on an 80% Delirious map. Albeit without crazy damage mods, it's only got like the monster move, attack, and cast speed. He still survived relatively okay. It's not like he died instantly, you know. He got down to, I think like 2/3, maybe half health at most there. But that's the idea. The build serves pretty well, it clears pretty well, even in 80% tier 16 Delirious maps. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, I'd honestly be more inclined to do Delirium maps if I didn't have to spend like multiple portals looting and like 10 minutes at the end of every single one of them just picking up stuff, but I enjoyed this build quite a bit. It was relatively fun. I wasn't really expecting to play a build that ended up being this complicated and having to spend so much time, you know, theory crafting and figuring out how to get everything working, but it ended up being a lot of fun. If you enjoy a super active playstyle, it might be something that you want to give a shot. And that is going to be it for the video. Now, as I said previously, make sure that you read the disclaimer before you start playing this build. There's a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to think about before you invest all the time and money in trying to make it work. So remember, boys, if you enjoyed the content, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and stay safe out there in Rayclast. And I'll see you guys in the next video.